Hello again, CSCI-150 students. This is a new recording for our course, and in this recording we'll focus on a new form of iteration or looping known as a for loop, in contrast to the while loop statement that we talked about last time. This is the same example that we did last time, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this example and convert the use of a while loop to a for loop. If you remember in this example, we had a certain number of grades that the user was allowed to enter. So in this case, it's 4. We had a counter that counted up to that number of grades, and we had the sum. And our objective was to allow the user to enter this many scores and then compute and display the average. So the loop worked as following. While the counter that we had was still less than the limit, enter a new score, add the score to the sum, increase the count by 1. By the time we exit the loop, count would have reached the value 4, and sum would have accumulated all the scores, so we divide the sum by the count, and then we display the average. So now we're going to do the same thing, except using a for loop. The general structure for a for loop usually looks something like this. I'm typing this up in the shell. It looks something like for some value in some collection of values. Okay, so what happens now is some value will take every value in that collection during a single iteration, and then move on to the next value. Oops, excuse me, to the next value until we basically exhaust all the values in the collection. So for now, we're going to be looping over a collection of integers. So similar to the book, we're going to use the range function for that. But before I show you that, I'm going to show you how the range function works. Suppose I've got collection over here is equal to range of, let's say, 5. Okay, and if I now say list collection, so show me the collection that you've created as a list of values, it's going to show me the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I were to write something like for val in range 5, print val. So what's going to happen is val is going to start with the value 0. It's going to execute the body of the loop, which contains multiple statements, but in this case, we just have a print statement. It's going to print 0, and then val is going to move on to the second value. Print 1, print 2, print 3, print 4, print 5. Okay, so that's basically, and notice I said print 5, it stops at 4. It stops one value short of the maximum value that you provide over here. The range function has a number of variations. If you provide one value only, it's the maximum. If you provide 2 values, then that will be the minimum and the maximum, but of course it's always excluding the maximum. So over here, the values printed would be 2, 3, and 4. You can also jump in different values. So you could say, go from 2 to 9, but jump in 2s. So in this case, it's going to start at 2, go to 4, 6, 8, and then stop, because the next value larger than, the next plus 2 would put it at 10, which is larger than 9. So what we need to do now, with this brief introduction, we need to figure out a way to rewrite this while loop using a for loop statement. Okay, so I'm going to comment out the loop. Okay, and I'm going to write the same thing, but now, so I've got the loop variable is count. Okay, I'm going to comment this line again because the for loop initializes the variable itself. So for count, there's nothing wrong in keeping count equal to 0, but you don't need it. For count in range limit. So in this case, the limit is 4. Count is going to start at 0 and then become 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to stop. So it's going to repeat 4 times. Every time you go inside the loop, you want, again, just like before, enter an exam score, and then add the exam to the sum. I no longer need to say count is equal to count plus 1, because count is automatically going to move on to the next value in the range. In fact, it's not a good idea at all to do that. In many programming languages, not Python, but in many programming languages, that would result in actual errors in your program. So we're going now to run the program, but let's reset here and run it in debug mode so that we're able to understand what's happening. Step over, we've got limit to 4, set to 4, sum equal to 0. And now I'm going to step into the loop, okay? Range. Okay, so first for count n, and then it's basically now setting up the count to be 0, the value that we saw. Enter a grade, step over, I'm going to enter the value for 40, okay? And step over, it's going to set the sum to 40. And notice that count now is set to the value 1. Repeat the process, 50, sum is 90, and count is now 1. Now, sorry, I meant 2. So 0, 1, 2, so this would be the third grade. Remember, we're starting at 0. Enter another exam score. Let's do 60. Sum is now 150. Count is 3. Enter the fourth grade. Let's do 70. So now the average should be 55. Enter. Step over. Notice that once count reaches 3, it's the next value it can assume would be 4, but 4 is not in the set of values. So it exits the loop outside, takes the sum, this number, divides it by the count. Let's see, step over, and then displays the value 73.33. And now you notice the average that was computed is not accurate. The sum is correct. 40 plus 50 is 90, plus 60 is 150, plus 70 is 220. But you notice that the count was not correct. That's because we're not incrementing. We are moving in a range of values. So in this particular case, when you want to divide, you want to make sure that you're dividing by count plus 1, not by count only, because count would stop at 3 and we need 1 more. Again, the issue is here we're starting to count at 0, so we stop 1 short. So I'm going to repeat now the same program and see now if we're able to get the correct score. Okay, so now it gave me 55, and it's still showing for 3 exam scores because over here I should write count plus 1. Okay, apply, try it one more time, 40, 50, 60, and 70, and now we've got the value correct. Of course, you could have done it all. You could have said over here count is equal to count plus 1, and then use just count over here and just count over here. But regardless of how you achieve the outcome, the logic remains exactly the same. So one thing to keep in mind about for loops versus while loops is that with while loops, you can pretty much solve any problem, especially at this level. Later on, when you go into more sophisticated problems, that might be a bit problematic. But while loops, for the most part, work all the time. For loops usually work only when you're going over a predefined set of values, like certain integer numbers in a range, or values in some collections, like letters in or characters in a string, or elements in a list, as we shall see later on. It provides for a much more convenient way to do that. We don't have to initialize and increment. We just provide this line, and this is like a summary for initialization, incrementation, and what have you. So we cannot replace any while loop with a for loop, but for the most part, you can replace any for loop with a while loop. So that should be all for this recording. The next recording, I'm going to talk about a special form of looping using while loops where the condition is not based on a count, just like we've seen so far. It's slightly different. It's based on a certain condition becoming true, and that condition is controlled by a special value known as a sentiment value. So I'll stop here, and I will be recording the next loop recording pretty soon. Thank you much.